Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something on the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know like to come on and have a chat with me, you can find me on social media. And I'm probably on the social media platform that you're on. And the best way to find out what my handle is there is go to isaac.r11.com and you'll find me. All right. So with that out of the way, let's get to my guest. We were chatting, and I looked. I'm like, oh, we should probably start streaming. This is somebody that if you've been to conferences, you've seen them around, and I'm looking forward to having a good conversation with them. So today, my guest is Sarah Young. Sarah, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hey, yeah, so my name's Sarah Young. I work at Microsoft currently. I'm still working out what my new job title is because it's a new job. So apparently I can kind of pick a little bit. So I am a technical, I call myself either Director of Security or technical TPM, and the innovation hubs at Microsoft, which if you are familiar, it used to be called the Microsoft Technology Center, or MTC. I'm sure maybe some of you have heard of it. We as you know, we change names.
Sure.
And I've been working in security for a super long time. I'm based in Australia, so it's the morning for me, and I know it's lunchtime for you now. No, nearly no
Yeah,
time.
it's
Where are
noon.
we,
It's
Isaac? Yeah,
it's noon. Yeah. Um,
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I love to kind of talk. One, I love having people that are in completely different disciplines as me. Like, obviously, you mentioned you're in
yeah.
security, and I love talking with security people because I find like the things that you're trying to solve and the things that you thinking about is fascinating. I want to get started though. Like, how did you come to technology, and how did you realize that technology was the thing for you?
So it's interesting. So always liked my technology. So when I was a kid, like my dad, he was one of those people who didn't work in technology. He was like technology adjacent, but like when I was a kid, I used to love computers, and we had, the family computer as you
Sure.
had
Yeah,
back
yeah,
in the
yeah.
day. Aging myself, but the family computer. And I used to want to play this game. It was some rubbishy kid game, but it needed for the sound to work, you needed to change the processor interrupts for the sound card. Now, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but I used to copy my dad because he got sick of me asking him to do it for me. So he actually basically showed me how to, go into MS-DOS, go into auto exec back and change these things. Now, I will stress, obviously at the time when I was like 6, 7, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was just copying him. But he was like, that's when I knew you were good at technology, because the fact you could copy me is a good thing. And I was like, okay, cool. But I used to know how to do it. And I used to like to get into printers when they had printer jams and like pull things out. And everyone always said to me, yeah, she's gonna work in technology or something. But when I was 17, I knew better, of course,
Sure.
and I did a history degree, as one does, because
As
you
one
know better
does.
when you're 17.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, so I did that, and then realized I had no idea what I was going to do with that. And I lived abroad, and I really wanted to live abroad again because I'm from the UK, and I thought about being a lawyer, but lawyers you can't move around, right? Because even if you know the law changes in different countries, right? Even if it's like subtle changes, and you have to requalify. So being a lawyer wasn't going to let me go around and do things and move countries. So that's why I went back. That's why I decided I would do tech. But obviously, with a history degree, you don't have like I don't have the background I could have had if I'd have formally studied more. So I just went on help desk at the local IT company around the corner from my mum and dad's house, because that's what I could do. And I was studying on the side. I did my CCNA because I worked at the time a hosting provider, again aging myself, that they did local data center hosting, so you could rent space in the data center. So I
Yeah,
used to do
yeah.
like hands and eyes requests and things like that as well. I'd go like reboot things, and so that's what I did for like 18 months. Then I ended up getting into Accenture down in London, and then I spent quite a bit of time going and deploying routers, switches, Cisco phones around Europe, which is, I still have such a love for Cisco Call Manager, such a love for it. I think it's like Stockholm syndrome because I spent so much time with it for like a 4-year period. Honestly, I deployed like 250,000 phones,
That's
and
crazy.
in some crazy random places in Europe. I also have like an encyclopedic knowledge of UK dial codes. So like in North America, it's, well, that's just slightly different, but the first few digits, denote the type of number it is. And I know in the US that the first few digits, obviously, it's the area as well. So it's a similar idea. And if you ask me, like, what's an '09 number, what's an '07 number, what's a blah blah blah, like, I know I did, well, I probably don't know them anymore as well as I did, but I used to know like all of them because we would be configuring dial plans and stuff. So that's a fairly useless skill that I still have. Then I moved to New Zealand because I love New Zealand. I'd lived there before and I really wanted to go back. And I had an interview with a company and I told them what I did. I was like, I do networks and switches and phones and blah, blah. And they were like, that's great. You can come here and do that. So when I got to New Zealand, and this is the most New Zealand thing, Kiwi thing ever. I get there and I'm like, okay, where are we going to deploy phones? And they're like, oh, we don't do that. Like, and I was
Okay.
like, okay, I'm not understanding why you gave me a job then, but okay. And they're like, oh, yeah, but you're technical, right? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, I'll go and help security. They need technical people. So I was like, okay. It was that or do like some stuff that looked quite boring. So I was like, okay then. And that is how I ended up in security, completely by accident. This was obviously before it was cool because
Sure.
now everyone wants to do security and it's really trendy, but it certainly wasn't back in the day. So that is, and then I've been doing security for about the last 12 years. I've gone from New Zealand to Australia. I spent some time in the US. I came back to Australia. Then Microsoft picked me up about 8 years ago now. So, and I've been there. I'm on like my 4th job at Microsoft. Obviously, as you know, huge company, so you can not leave the company but get some very
Sure.
different jobs within there. So yeah, I've kind of been around in terms of what I've done, but also location. But I am kind of over moving now. I think I'm done with moving countries because I bought a house and put nice lights in it. So
Yeah, you
I'll
can't move
probably,
those lights for sure. Or
I
the
can't move the, actually, you really can't move the lights. So they say, they say with all these sticky things, oh, you can take them off and they don't peel the
no.
paint. It's
No,
so
no.
not
No,
true.
it's not true.
They definitely can. So the hexagons behind me, which you can only just see the bottom of, I wanted to one of the things I put on, and it wasn't quite in the right place, and I'd only put it on just then, so I tried to peel it very gently. It started to peel off the paint immediately, and so I very much I feel sorry for whoever buys this house if I ever move out, because they're going to end up with all these things or huge holes in the paint. But that sounds like a not me problem. So
Sure. Yeah, no, that's first off, there's a lot there, right? I think one of the things that
yes.
you said I'm very fascinated about because it resonated with me is that like you talked about like CCNA and like so like I remember
Yes.
when I was in high school, like I had friends that were getting like the Network Plus or the A Plus exams, like they
Hmm.
were going through that whole route. And then I remember I had like a friend of mine, their dad was like in the networking IT admin space, and he was like very like anti like, oh, you don't need any of that cert stuff, you don't need those certifications. And I just
Hmm.
remember because in my brain it's like, oh, you have certifications, like maybe that helps you with the job or whatever. And it's funny because you think about that as it pertains to today, and there's still this argument about like, oh, do you need those certs or do you need just relevant experience, right? So what was kind of your
Yeah.
reasoning as to like getting the certs versus trying to find some help desk job and then just learning all that
Yeah.
stuff like organically?
Mm. Well, I think for me at the time, and I totally know what you're saying about that debate about do we need certifications, do we not, is that because I didn't have anything else, I hadn't studied like, I mean, I'd done stuff at school, but like my degree was in history. I was like, I don't have anything that proves I like sat down and learned some technical stuff. But actually, in full transparency, I managed to get the help desk job before I started studying for the CCNA, and but it was, it was a small IT company around the corner from my mum and dad's house, and they were doing, and some people there were studying CCNA, and I sort of jumped in on their group and was like, oh, I could do this, and it was good because the problem I had was I love tech and I was really enthusiastic, but because I didn't have a good foundational theoretical knowledge. Now, I'm not saying everybody needs that, but it helps you understand the bigger picture, right? Like, I learned properly, IPv4, subnetting, blah, 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 because I do think that sort of foundational knowledge, whether it's networking, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's like programming, even if you're not going to do it, you kind of need to understand the concepts. And
Yeah.
that's why I think it was useful. I think I also have in security specifically. It's interesting you say that, because in security specifically, and I know it's other areas of IT, we have the same discussion, but security for a long time, you would never go straight into security, right? You would always come in from another area of IT,
Yeah.
whether you were a dev or whether you were infrastructure, didn't matter. You usually had experience in another bit of IT. You wouldn't go straight in. Security was perceived to not be an entry-level job. And that's been the case for a long time. So what's interesting is that there's still this overwhelming idea that you can't come into security like fresh from some kind of study course, college or whatever. But in the last 10 years since I started in security, there's been like an explosion in cybersecurity specific courses, and so there are people specifically studying cybersecurity, and rather than doing other bits of IT, they want to jump straight into security. And there's a discussion within the security community about, should you go work in another bit of IT? And actually, when you look at entry level, and I know, again, this is a wider thing than just security, when you see like these entry level roles, they actually say you need to have like 5 experience or something like that. And I don't know, I don't know what the answer is. I know that some of these courses, well, my opinion is, I've seen a mixed bag with these study courses, and I do mean even at like, expensive fancy colleges. Like, some of them look very good and well rounded. Some of them, like, I remember talking to a student once who said they were studying like counterterrorism or something as part of their cybersecurity degree, and I was like, well, that sounds super interesting just to learn about, but I don't know how that's actually gonna help you like work. and I think because security has become quite trendy in the last sort of 5-7 years, I think there's a lot of places offering cybersecurity courses that are like questionably useful. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I have to say I feel very grateful that I don't have to negotiate that myself.
Yeah.
I feel really sorry for people just coming out of study in the last few years, because I think it's really difficult. And I just honestly, I'm like, I don't have an answer. I don't have a solution for this. I just feel really sorry for them trying to navigate this stuff.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's interesting too. And you probably recognize this because you've worked at like a big consulting company. Like, I worked at Avanade, which is basically Accenture, right? And you worked at
Oh yeah,
and you worked at Accenture. Like, for big like consulting companies, like getting certifications is like very valuable, because then you get like Microsoft partner and you get these other things, right? Like, so
yes.
it's a way for you to kind of get a leg up on competition too. And I always thought it was kind of fascinating. It's like, okay, so if I get a bunch of certifications, like, it helps me be more, I guess, visible as a candidate, but it doesn't really mean that I know things. It just means that I'm good at taking tests, right?
Yes, I mean, look, I remember when I worked for when I was a consultant, we would hire like contractors to help us with big deployments, on a short-term basis. And I used to, and I was quite young at the time, now
Sure.
looking back on it, like interviewing these candidates, and I would get to go through their resumes or CVs, and I would look at them, and most of them were absolutely stacked with certifications, stacked with them, like more than I had. And then we'd pick, the ones who looked the best, and we'd interview them. And I remember talking to them, and I would be asking them some relatively basic questions, say about Cisco Call Manager, that like if you had touched the product, that level of basicness that like if you touch the product you would know it.
Sure,
Like,
sure.
and lots I was it blew my mind, because this was my first experience of this, that so many of them didn't know.
Yeah.
And I was like, how could you not know this? This is like really fundamental stuff. But I don't know how it is now. I think unfortunately, there are a lot of like you said, I know that exam providers across the board have tried to put in ways of stopping this, but I do think, unfortunately, and this is a shame because it's devalued the tests, is that there are people, who just go and buy the exam dumps online and just learn the answers, or the study guides,
Yeah.
and I think that the sad thing about that is that it's just devalued the tests for those who do go and study
Sure,
and do it
sure.
properly. And so, yeah, but I mean, that's not a new thing. I mean, I'm talking when I was doing these interviews is over 10 years ago. So I think it's just an ongoing challenge. And I know, like, again, across the board, people who are trying to do these certifications are trying to find ways within the test to stop people being able to do that, right? To bring up the value, but it's difficult, right? And I think if you've, I now know that I have a perception in my brain, I have kind of a bias that if someone has like 10, 15 certifications,
Sure.
like an insane amount, I'm immediately suspicious. I'm
Sure.
like, because of these experiences I've had in the past. And that's a shame, because I do know there are people out there are good people out there who genuinely spend a lot of
Yeah.
time studying and doing it properly. And so, yeah, I hate it for them. I hate it for people because of that whole thing, that they have been devalued somewhat.
Yeah. You mentioned something too that I found quite interesting. It's like the most of the time, like security professionals, like they came from other practices in IT or in technology, right? And now you see there's more emphasis on getting people that are like new to career. Like I've mentioned this
Yeah.
before in the show. Like, I've gone and spoken at my university, where I went to college, and I was like, okay, so like what are you folks like learning, like what sort of like the IT, like information systems degree, like what classes do you take? And they're like, oh, we take security and we take like business and like data analytics. So like there's not like a lot of like dev work or like system design anymore. There is still a little bit of that, but not as much as it used to be, because those are the kind of jobs that people are seeing that they're hiring more of, is the security type of jobs. And I guess my question was, and I'll ask you this, like when you're new in career and you don't have like tactical experience as like working at a large organization or even a small organization's IT company, IT organization, like what sort of like things from a security standpoint do you actually learn? Like, because I feel like, at least to me, and this is probably incorrect, so please correct me, that
Yeah.
like security is like a lot of on the job sort of training, and you learn how systems work. You learn, what trends are, what you should and should not be doing, like that sort of stuff. I just don't see it as something that's like, okay, I'm going to give you a book on network security and learn it, and you know,
Yeah. So it's interesting because security, I mean, it's always important to remember security is insanely broad, right? I
sure,
mean, because every bit of IT has security. So there's nobody, and no matter what anyone tells you, there's nobody out there that knows all of security really well. It's just like literally not possible because the field's so broad, which is why we need people with different specialties. So for me, if you ask me about like infrastructure and cloud and stuff, I know that stuff really well. But if you said to me, Sarah, can you go and reverse engineer this malware? I know, like,
yeah, sure,
I don't even know where to start. So there's definitely, that's why we need a broad spread of people. But you're right. I think it's very useful. And again, like I was saying, there's debate within the industry, and is that you go and work in another bit of IT, whatever it is, web, development or networks, admin stuff. And the reason it's useful to do that is because in theory you should learn more security, because security is across the board, right? So you'll learn more, and also you learn how people do things wrong as well, because it's all well and good sitting down and reading a book, but I can tell you, without naming specifics, in the early days of my career, I saw some terrible things done from a security
Sure.
perspective, and for various different reasons as well. Not to, because when security is competing against other kind of priorities. So for example, if you've got a project timeline you have to meet, and to do the security the right way is going to delay you, and say your company's going to get a penalty if it doesn't deliver on time, say if it's consultancy or something, sometimes they say, no, we're just not going to do it because we'll take the hit. And there can be so many reasons, because I think if you just sit and read from a book, a lot of the time it's easy to be like, and I've had this discussion with students and stuff. They'll be like, oh, well, no one would do that. No one would do that. And you're like, no,
Everyone
yeah,
does
would.
that. Yes.
Yeah. No one would do that. They wouldn't do that because that's really bad from a security perspective. And you're like, no, it is, but people will do it. And there can be a host of reasons that it's been done like that.
Sure.
And usually it's usually not malicious or anything, but there's like competing priorities. And I think without working in other bits of IT, it's hard to learn that sort of stuff. And the reason that's important, because I think kind of learning the theoretical, like, this is good security, this is bad security, you should implement this, you should implement that, kind of thing, you almost can learn that from a book.
Sure.
But what that doesn't teach you is the real life, what happens in real life, right? Again, this is a wider thing than just security. But you understand that although this is a terrible, say, oh, we've turned off multi-factor authentication here. And people say, oh, well, you should never do that. Multi-factor is the best, blah, 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 blah. You're like, oh, well, it's, for example, some exec who is very, very senior who refuses to have an app on his phone, or
Sure.
or his or her phone, whatever it is. I mean, that sounds stupid, but let's face it, that kind of stuff happens. Hopefully MFA less so nowadays,
Sure,
because
yeah.
I think it's been well publicized. But I got a friend whose dad works with small businesses. He does IT for small businesses, and he wanted to implement multi-factor authentication across the board, and they all pushed back going, no, absolutely not. If you do that, we're going to leave you, because we can't afford to make sure everyone, even though it's very, very cheap and accessible nowadays, we can't afford to have, make sure everyone has a phone or an authenticator app or whatever. And I user-based don't want it, blah, 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 blah. And that's the kind of stuff that, those kind of weird and wonderful scenarios that mean that security doesn't get implemented, is the stuff I think you only learn when you actually work, because it's impossible to learn that stuff in a book. So that's, I think, the important thing, that for, specifically for security, they're like, oh, well, they wouldn't do that. And you're like, yeah, they would. Yeah, they would. And they may be fully aware that it's not great from security, but there can be competing pressures and priorities that mean it's a thing.
Yeah, and why is that, do you think? Like, I mean, I've always joked, and this is unfortunate, it's like the things that are added at the end of projects, right? It's like, okay, like, do we have authentication, authorization? Do we have, like, are we using, like, some security library? Other things like logging, other things like, like, how do we deploy this thing? Like, why is security kind of, like, added like, bunched together at, like, the end of projects is like, okay, these are the things, like, we have to do.
Yeah, well, hopefully, of course, we've been pushing for a while for things not to be just brought in at the end, because it's messy.
Of course.
You're right. So I think the thing is, and we keep forgetting this, I don't think it's a technical problem so much. Like, the tech is this is what I say to people all the time about security. Tech is straightforward in that it's quite black and white. Either you implement this or you don't. Now, again, I'm oversimplifying, but the problem is like people and behaviors, and people and behaviors is a really big bit of security. So even if you develop the most secure application in the world, if you've got someone who's like got their password under the keyboard or like pinned to their, like, the side of their screen on a post-it note, it's game over. So I think the problem is that and in terms of developing things, you need to make people, and the builders in this case, care more about security early doors. And to be honest with you, here's the problem, is that often developers and builders, they're told, yeah, do security, make it secure, blah, blah. But ultimately, that's not what they're being like pushed to do, and it's not what they're rewarded on. Like, your typical dev is there and is going to get rewarded and rated on building an application that does whatever it needs to do, right? And does it well. And security can often be a blocker to that. It often competes. The main problem you've got is security often competes against other priorities, and unless you literally make it part of people's job to do it properly, and what I mean is, maybe they're actually like rewarded based on it, a lot of folks won't care. But then if you try and do that to devs, the flip side of that is, if you suddenly say to a load of devs, like, if you don't make this secure, you're not going to get your bonus or whatever, then you can get a lot of pushback from that as well. So there's so many different like layers of complication with it, and I don't have the answer. But I think as well, just this is I think the thing we need to move towards, and we've been saying this for a long time, and it's not easy, is that you've got security professionals, and what it used to be was that no one else would care about security. They'd build their thing, they'd throw it over the wall and be like, here, security, go do your thing, make it secure.
Yeah.
And now, and that was what we used to do kind of before Agile, right? You could throw it over the wall to the next team and be like, security, make this secure now, we've built it, do your thing. Nowadays, with I say nowadays, it makes it sound like it's a new development, which it isn't. But with this doing this kind of continuous deployment and like small iterative deployments, we can't throw things over the wall in the same way. It doesn't work, right? So what we have to move towards, but this is such a huge culture change and it's slow, is that everyone has to think about security from the word go. Because you can't just, if you're deploying 3, 4, 5 times a day, you can't be like, hey, security, check this. Hey, security, check this again. Hey, security, check this again. It doesn't work. And so you have to have the people who are doing the building think more about security from the word go. Now, that doesn't mean the security team becomes redundant. And this is what some security people think as well. Because I would argue that if you are a security person who feels that by teaching your devs and your building teams, other supporting teams, that you teach them to do a bit of baseline security, you're going to lose your job, then you're probably not a very good security person. But what we want is, it sounds cheesy, but we want to get to this culture where, we call it like security first culture, that the devs are like, I need to do this, but I need to do it in a secure way. And I 100% believe, by the way, I have never spoken to a single dev or a builder who doesn't get that security is important and doesn't understand it high level conceptually. And we have burnt ourselves in security historically by saying to people like, it's security, you couldn't understand this, it's too hard. No way. Security, the foundational stuff is very straightforward and it's common sense, but I just think that outside of security, people have not necessarily developed the muscle, like, have I checked, this is secure and blah, blah, blah. And also historically, the tools that devs have had to do security, like, check for, check dependencies and do your code scanning, have been pretty clunky. And so they've actually held them up rather than anything else. And I know that they've improved a lot. Now with AI and copilots and stuff, I mean, it's getting even better. But historically, they were very clunky. And I think a lot of devs got burnt and were like, I'm not touching that thing. And I also know this, if you take like Entra or Active Directory, the artist formerly known as Active Directory. Like, if you think of old school on-prem AD, it used to be an absolute nightmare to integrate with it, right? Because it was all these disgusting proprietary protocols, and loads of devs, even if they tried, were like, this was a nightmare, I'm never touching this again. Whereas now, and I speak to loads of people, I'm like, have you actually tried to integrate that with Entra? and they're like, nah, haven't even tried. And you're just like, oh, and you're like, have you actually looked at it recently? Because now, for those who are uninitiated, Entra, and not a plug for Entra, it's just a good example that everybody knows, AD and Entra, that now the online version, Azure AD or now Entra, just is entirely like open protocols. It's standard industry stuff. We don't use weird proprietary stuff. And it's actually hell of a lot easier to integrate to, but people have a perception that it's hard and just don't go and do
Sure,
it.
sure, sure.
So there's a lot of like educational pieces, and there's partly an education piece. There's also like a tooling piece, that the tooling has improved so much in like say the last 5 years. I'm not saying it's perfect, like at all, but it's so much easier for people to use. And I think we're just suffering with, again, because it's not their primary job. As a dev, are you going to keep up to date with all the dev security tooling? Not necessarily. And so I think we have a big education piece, and actually need to go and listen more to the end users, because historically as well, if someone bought a security tool, they'd just be like, we don't care how much longer it takes you to build this thing. You just have to do it because security.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think now there's a better appreciation in the security industry that you can't just say, wag your finger and be like, you must do this because security.
Yeah.
We don't care if it takes you 3 times as long, because we know that people aren't going to do it. So I think we're getting there, but it's like a very slow journey, understandably so, to make everybody be like more security first, but also but not hamper productivity. And that's the challenge, but we're getting there, but it's slow.
Yeah, but is it really that, and I'm going to say this the most crass way ever, like security
Yeah.
isn't sexy, right? So like it's not shipping a new feature, it's not like making a
Yes.
widget, it's not doing it like it's plumbing.
It
And
is, yeah.
because of that, you run a risk of like a business, like other than, oh, do you want to get breached? Do you want your data to be leaked? Like that's the only thing that's really keeping any executive team or leadership team like worried about security. Like if those things didn't exist, then a lot of companies would just say, we don't even need this security thing, because it doesn't actually directly correlate to revenue.
Yeah. No, no, that's been, so it's interesting. So when I first started in security, we would regularly have this conversation with like leadership and stuff too. They'd be like, oh, why should we like spend money on security? Now, obviously there were still certain like industry areas, so like government and financial, that have been more mature in that area or had more legislation. But you'd still get a lot of businesses and leadership that'd be like, security, like, we won't get hacked. Why would they hack us? Blah 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 blah. And you're like, actually, well, you're on the internet, so you could get hacked. Why would they hack you? Because they can. And I think in all the time I've worked in security, we've definitely moved away from that kind of. I don't think you often get asked now, why do we need to pay for this?
Sure.
However, I don't think I rarely have that sort of level of discussion. However, it isn't sexy, and you don't see a flashy feature. It's all in the background. So they often say, I forget the exact phrase now, but the gist of it is, from like, I used to run, I think it was the FBI. He's like, security isn't cool. Security isn't a priority until it is. Because until you get breached. So if you've got which shouldn't be the way, right? But you're right. It's behind the scenes. It's the plumbing. Like everyone knows, you don't need to explain to anybody why you don't want to be breached. That's pretty obvious, like for any organization. But sometimes they're like, oh, well, I think sometimes there's a deliberate willfulness to be like, it won't happen to us.
Yeah.
Or with that, like I was saying, the throwing over the fence mentality, there's still folks out there that are like, well, that's not my problem, it's the security team's problem. Like if I build an app that's like got SQL injection, got cross-site scripting, whatever, like it's not my problem, that's security's problem to fix. So I think it is more of a like I said, it's definitely a people and attitude and culture problem, but it's also a very difficult one to solve as well, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are not rewarded on making something secure. So they're like, why would I spend my time making this thing really secure when I see, there's nothing, I don't get any praise from my leadership. It's not like tied to my rewards, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think we've fully solved that as an industry. Like there are some companies, including Microsoft, that we're doing something called Secure Future Initiative. You can read all about it online. We make a big deal of it for the last couple of years, and that's about moving to a security first culture for everybody across the board in like the whole company. So now we all have like a priority. We have to write in our like in like our annual reviews, we have to have a priority about security, and there are rewards tied to security to try and encourage, even if you're not specifically in security, to make people care.
Sure.
But it's a culture shift, and any kind of culture shift is very difficult, and it's slow and it takes time, and there'll always be people who are like, this isn't my problem, I'm not a security person. So I don't know, it's very difficult across the board to change security culture, because it's a people thing, and people are a billion shades of gray, not black and white,
Sure,
right?
sure.
So yeah, I think, and also I just think it's a slow thing. You can't just turn it off, turn it on. Like, you can with tech, you can write a new line of code, you can turn a rule off, you can turn a rule on, it's on or it's off. But culture is like a very gradual change. You can try and encourage it, but it's not easy. Yeah, it's a big thing, and I don't think we as an industry have a good like playbook, as in you go Y Z. Oh look, now everyone cares about
Yeah.
security. Hooray! Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to me solely because of the fact that the risk is so high, right? Like I don't think you really need to. Well, how am I going to phrase this? I don't think that only companies that are not caring about security are getting breached. I think that a lot of companies
No.
that care very much about security get breached. So it's one of those things where, um, you could do all of the work and you could still potentially have the same risk, right?
Yeah. So yes, you're right. Some organizations might not have done a lot of security and don't get breached for like ever or a really long time. And some companies, like you said, or organizations that have spent a long time, a lot of money and effort, can still get breached. It's a bit of a trope, but it is true. We call it like the attacker defender's dilemma. So in order to not get breached, the defenders have to get their security controls right again and again and again and again. And it can be, very basic stuff. But if you're a large or complicated organization, to get stuff like keeping everything patched, doing multi-factor, having threat protection everywhere, doing these basics, principle of least privilege, accounts not having more privilege than they need, you have to do that stuff correctly every single time across the board. And if you whereas someone who's trying to breach you, they only have to get it right and get in through something, find a weakness one time, and they're in. And so this is the dilemma, is that the defenders have to get stuff right across the board consistently all the time. Attackers have to get something right maybe once, or find a breach really once. So the odds are like always stacked against us.
Yeah.
But equally, I would say it doesn't mean you shouldn't try, because I'll tell you what, if you don't try, you make it a heck of a lot easier.
Sure.
So, but it's hard. It's basically, I wouldn't say we're always playing catch up, like, but we kind of are, because they have an advantage in that they've only got to, find something wrong with one system often. But then we also say it's defense in depth. So because no security control is 100% ever. So you need layers so that if one goes, if they get through one, you've got something else to stop them. And you need at least, a few layers. And interestingly, I have a talk, but where I compare it to like other industries that deal with safety. And the analogy I always use, is aviation, just because most people have flown, so at least some point in their lives. So because if you look at, because they also use this Swiss cheese model where you have the different layers of cheese, and all the holes have to line up exactly for something bad to happen. And the idea is if it gets through one hole, the next layer of cheese stops it because the hole's in a different position. And they use that for, it's got a real name as well. It's actually called Reason's model. And any industry that deals with safety uses it too. So aviation, medical, like mining, things like that, because they put different layers of controls in place to make sure they don't have accidents. So, if you take a plane, when horrible plane accidents happen, and they're relatively rare, but when they happen, if you're into like air crash investigation and those kind of shows, of which there are many, if you go and watch them, you'll actually see that it's not just one thing that went wrong. Like, it's multiple things that went wrong before there is these horrible plane crashes. It's not just like the wing fell off, done. Like, why did the wing? And I'd be dramatic, but like, the wing just didn't fall off the plane. Like, it's like, you know, there was a weakness in the structure. And why was there a weakness in the structure? Because they didn't do maintenance properly. And why didn't they do maintenance properly? Because the engineers weren't trained, blah 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 blah. Like, it's not as straightforward, and it's exactly the same in security, except I'd say other industries are much better at, when something bad happens, making sure it never happens again. And obviously that is, that it is targeted slightly differently. Of course, say with a plane accident, a lot of people die. You can't cover up a plane accident, and people are usually pretty keen to see when people die, that they don't want to see the same mistake happen again, etc., etc. Whereas I would argue that if you look at obviously, people could theoretically die with security, of course, say if it was a hospital or something, but it's not sort of a clear-cut line to people dying. And I think that's why, or at least probably one of the big drivers why, when we have horrible breaches, we often see similar things happen again and again and again down the line, because people aren't as open. I don't know. I would like to see the security industry, when we have a breach, be like, okay, this can never happen again for everybody. What do we do to fix it? But it's really not that straightforward, unfortunately. And we know that a lot of companies, if they do get breached, will not report it if they don't have to,
Sure.
or
Yeah.
if it's not publicly obvious, because there's a lot of reputational damage and shame. There are some jurisdictions, of course, that are bringing in mandatory breach reporting. Like, you will have to report it if it happens, but they're across the board, and I don't know if we ever will be. So, although there are a lot of similarities, I can't say it's exactly the same. But I do wish that we could be a bit more open and share, because I think there'd be more learnings. But
Yeah.
we'll see.
Well, that kind of leads me into like the one of the things I'm curious too about is like, how do you stay like topical? Like, how do you stay up to date with things? Like, because I mean, technology trends like, oh, like the new developer framework, the new thing, that like that stuff is, at least from my visibility, like pretty well marketed, and people are always out there like talking about the new thing. With security, I mean, maybe I'm not in the right spaces, but I don't see that as much. Do you like, you know when bad things happen, but like
Yes.
how do you keep up to date with like not just what like vulnerabilities that have been like compromised, but like what are some trends that you're seeing across compromises?
Yeah. So again, so for it is and it isn't. It's, as you said, it's changing all the time. But the good thing is that high level, principally, I say the good news is that it doesn't change that much, right? So what I mean by this is that uh, the high level principles of what we do in security, honestly, they don't change.
Sure.
So it's things like it's how we implement them changes a little bit, and that's what changes over time, depending on the technology. But at the end of the day, sort of these things like, say, principle of least privilege, like all accounts, applications, identities should never have any more privilege than they need to do the specific task they're assigned to. That, now, how you do that might change a little bit, but that high level principle hasn't changed for like 25, 30 years. And even now with AI, I know I've been having a lot of conversations, like if we look at agents and so it's the same thing. An agent is still just an identity. And I can see there being problems with people not being bothered, or they don't have time to work out exactly what permissions their agent needs. So they just let it like throughout their entire environment. And then if that agent is compromised, but not even if it's compromised, it might just decide to do some crazy stuff that will damage your environment. And if it's got too much permissions, it could do a lot of things that you didn't intend it to do. Because actually, security at a super high level is basically systems doing stuff they weren't intended to do.
Sure.
If you really want to simplify it. And and sometimes people forget because we think, oh, there's hackers, they're going to exfiltrate things, blah blah, and that's absolutely true. But security is also about making systems. Sometimes people inadvertently cause breaches or break systems and they weren't even intending to. It happens more often than you'd think.
Yeah.
That it's a completely unintentional thing that someone has done, but it ends up breaking things or exposing data, and it was a complete accident. So I think high level the principles don't change about what we're trying to do, but what we have to keep up to date with is kind of how we do that in different systems. But honestly, you would be amazed at how much I end up just talking about, don't give it too much privilege, don't do this, don't do that. Exactly the same. It's just because it's not sexy, and it's hard to do it consistently. But keeping up to date, I mean, obviously there's the internet, which is I mean, that's where you find out all the things. Obviously, what's a shame is one of the things that's changed over the last couple of years is it used to be you would just go to Twitter, X, because that's where everyone in the community hung out. Obviously, since things have changed the last few years, it's become a lot more fragmented where you read things, which I think is a shame because you have to kind of be across multiple platforms, because some people are not. It used to be everyone was on X, Twitter, and now that's not the case. But honestly, it's just being interested in it, to be honest with you. There are new threat actors. So sometimes we see new threat actors. So I'll tell you a good, like, more open sourcey one that some people might have heard about recently. The one that I'm like fascinated by at the moment is the NPM package compromises that have happened over the past couple of months. For anyone who hasn't heard, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. There was
Have you heard about it?
yes, yeah. I think if you're in tech adjacent, you've probably heard about it to some extent, right? Like it's one of those things where it trickles out and then, maybe it affects you directly or whatever, right? But yeah.
I feel like either you know it because if you're in security, honestly, I just think you have to force yourself to keep up to date, read what's going on, etc. Because and then if you're adjacent, like as in you've got a package that was compromised, but things like the Shai Hulud, the NPM package compromises, I was like, oh, this is so old school. It's like basically a modern version of a worm, hence why it's called Shai Hulud from June. But it's a modern version, right? So we're seeing like a tactic that was not kind of or a pattern of behavior. So it looks new, but actually it's not, because it's just basically going through packages and it's trying to replicate in other things and then posting things publicly. So it within a GitHub repo. So it's like a modern version of attacks that we used to see in the past. And at the end of the day, for my reading of it, although I haven't read sort of the latest ones, is that the way that they got access was by compromising maintainer accounts. So it was an identity compromise. So again, what I find is when you dig into security, these new attacks are often not that new. It's kind of a new take on some tried and some old school stuff. So another example, like if we take MCP. So earlier in the year, well, MCP only started like 13 months ago, right? But earlier in the year, maybe March, April time, there was a lot of chat around, oh my goodness, MCP. MCP, there's this new attack. It's called tool poisoning, and they're changing like how the tool is. So they're changing the metadata. They're putting like dodgy instructions in the metadata of the tool, and so when these MCP when the clients are pulling it, it's doing funky things. Ooh, that's really scary. And you're like, yeah, that's called indirect prompt injection. We've been seeing that for a few years. But again, if you're not familiar, security people were kind of like, oh, it's just indirect prompt injection. We've been dealing with that for a few years.
Fair.
But if you don't, but I know within sort of the MCP dev community, you wouldn't necessarily know that. And there was a bit of panic, like, oh my goodness, this is really malicious. And you're like, yeah, we've seen that before.
Yeah.
It is like a variation on a theme. But this is why security and other bits of IT need to talk to each other, because we were like, Yeah, we've seen that before. Yeah, we're already dealing with that. It's a variant of indirect prompt injection, which is something we've been dealing with ever since really LLMs came to prominence. So, and indirect prompt injection is same thing. You put a prompt, but you're pointing it at something malicious within the prompt, and it's the malicious bit is on what you're pointing to
Sure.
rather than within the prompt itself. And it's much more insidious than prompt injection, because prompt injection, you try and put some malicious instruction right into the prompt, and we've got pretty good at like picking up on that, although we're not perfect. We've got pretty good at picking up on that. But indirect, because of course you can tell your LLM to go and look at what the possibilities are endless,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Indirect prompt injection is and there are legit use cases for that as well, right? Telling the LLM to go fetch or look at something somewhere else. So that one is a much more insidious attack to sort of deal with, because the possibilities of what you could ask it to go and look at are like endless. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this, like, it's so funny because this space, to your point, like the AI, LLM prompt based space, like, there's so much like black box or whatever. Like, after you hit enter in the text box, like, whatever happens, like, I don't have control over. I don't really know, right? And yeah, like I know a lot of the like Gemini has it, OpenAI has it, like the deep research thing will kind of tell you what it's doing in the process, right?
yes,
But
the reasoning piece where it goes
yeah,
boom, 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 boom,
but
boom,
still,
boom, yeah.
like, you don't really know what's going on. And back to what we're saying, in what everybody's been saying, is like non-determinism means like they don't really know what any of this stuff really means. They're just parsing information and looking for similarities and things. And so if you're looking to secure stuff like that, are you just trying to put some form of guardrails, like basically like the bowling analogy, where it's just like, okay, like, we can do our best, but at the end of the day, like, you're going to put yourself in bad positions if you do bad things.
So this is we could spend a whole hour. So this is an interesting one. So the good news, I'll tell you the good news and the bad news. The good news is for your average person building AI stuff, you're going to be using someone else's AI platform, whether that's Microsoft, Google, whatever. You're using someone else's platform. And the models are sort of embedded in the platform. They're looking after the models, blah blah. So a lot of the attacks that we have seen / have theoretically been proven, things like model poisoning, things like where you actually poison the training data of the model to make it do funky stuff, that sort of stuff. If you're using a third-party AI platform, that virtually everybody is, because AI platforms are very expensive to build.
Yeah.
Like most organizations are not building their own. So that is the provider's problem. So I talk in the context of Microsoft. But again, you can apply this to any platform provider. So like model poisoning is like our problem at the platform layer, because we we train the models and then we lock them up, and make them immutable, and basically customers call down to the models, because we couldn't have the models learn from every single call a customer made, because the model would just be a mess like immediately. So there's other reasons we have to do that apart from just security, for consistency of product. But you're right, and we have content filters and stuff. And again, like I said, everybody has similar. I'll talk Microsoft-y, but it's similar. All the providers have similar things. So we actually hard out security test and red team and offensively test the models before they're loaded into the platform. And whether it's a Microsoft developed model or anybody else, if you find it in the Microsoft platform, we have like red teamed it and tested it to death. And they are testing it with prompts, they're testing it with traditional security stuff. We do like the whole lot. So it has been thoroughly tested before you deploy it. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be testing it too. So we have, for the prompt injection stuff, we have something called content filters. So when you put a prompt into the LLM, we filter it and we have a look at what you've put in the prompt. And if it looks dodgy, if you're using something that looks like a jailbreak or something, we'll filter it before it even hits the LLM. But we also filter on the way back out as well, because say it gets past, say it doesn't get, your prompt itself doesn't get filtered, and it hits the LLM. If the LLM does something funky that we're not really expecting it to do, and it's returning something that we don't like, the response from the LLM is also filtered. I'm massively oversimplifying this, but just so actually it's filtered twice in and out before it comes
Okay.
back to you as well. So there's two checkpoints there just on the prompt side, as in we check what you're sending it, but we also check what it actually wants to send back out as well. And there are actually, and most providers are getting quite, obviously we don't give exact technical specifications, and because it's non-deterministic, this is why we have to do this. But a lot of that testing, not all of it, is done on your platform provider's side. We do a lot of testing before you use it, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be testing too. So if you're using something like a Copilot, I almost call that like a SaaS service, as in we've done most of the testing for you, because a lot of the functionality is very locked down. But if you're building your own application, you need to do testing. So even though we've done all this prompt stuff and blah blah, you should still be testing it with your data set, whatever your LLM is calling to, or whatever your application is like grabbing from. And so it's kind of not as dissimilar as you would think from like a normal application. I always say to people, like, think of AI as it is just an application you're building with a tool set that's some AI. So you still should test it in all the normal ways you would for security. Test your code, test. Because the thing is, here's the thing with attackers, right? Because obviously something like model poisoning sounds like super sexy, and everyone's like, oh my god, they're gonna change the model. Oh, that's a really cool attack. But here's the thing: attackers are not going to spend months and months trying to model poison something if you're like, you're not even, if your application is like got its own little crappy identity store, it's not even plugged into an Entra, an Okta, something like enterprise level, if they can just compromise you some other way, just spend loads of time doing that. So I think, although it's not sexy, like the basics are still by far and away the most important thing. And I think we are losing, and this is true. Now it's AI, but it used to be other things. We lose track of that. And something that has been an issue forever that we don't talk about enough is data security. So data security is not a new problem, but AI, but most organizations, they don't classify their data. It's like pretty flat, the structure. And the problem is now AI is like a superpowered search engine. So if you had a weird file or data store off in the corner that nobody, a human had to find it before they could see something maybe they weren't supposed to. Where now, if you've got like AI and you say, hey AI, can you find me any documents that say payroll, for example, and it will find it like really quick. So what I'm excited about is that something that is not new, it's not a new concept at all, is that people are going to start caring more about data security, which is a good thing, because AI is really good at finding stuff that you didn't know was there. And it's going to force people to care more.
I mean, that's all fascinating. I mean, I think, especially in this space, since everything is somewhat new. I know it's been a couple of years now, but like we're still trying to figure out like the best way to build systems on top of these things that are going to prevent us from kind of falling into our own pit of despair, right? I mean, I think like this conversation has been great. I just looked at the time and I was like, oh shit. So like, I mean, I think one of the things too that I'd love to kind of get from you is like, obviously a lot of people, they might think about security a little bit, they might be aware of security a little bit, but like they don't live and breathe it. So like, what do you say to the people that, they need to think about security, but it's not core competency to their job? Like, what do you tell them?
Yeah, I think what I would tell people is, you're right. Like, security is not as hard. Security is like, we have to, as an industry, move to this security first culture. So there's still going to be security people who live and breathe it. It's their job. But anybody else in IT needs to care to an extent. Like, so it's more about understanding. And this is what I like beg people. I'm like, it is not, I know that security has been quite rubbish, I'll use a nicer word than swearing. We kind of been like a-holes to other bits of IT historically. And so we haven't been super collaborative. We've often just, wagged our fingers and say, just do this because security, we don't care, it's going to take you longer. And we haven't really listened to the rest of IT. And so what I would, and that is changing, I think, again, slowly, that we're saying, hey, look, we get because we've realized that we need the rest of IT to help us, because you can't just throw it all over the fence at a security team in an organization of any size and expect it to be done properly. It has to be done like as kind of a team effort. It's cheesy, but we say security is a team sport. So what I'd say to people is, please, like if hopefully, like, go and engage with your security team. I really hope you don't have an old school one that will just wag your fingers, because there is an acceptance on our side that we haven't done it well, and that we need to dialogue with people and also work out how we can make people do security without like affecting their productivity badly. Like, make the right way the easy way to do it. And we're not there 100%, but please talk to security and try and like have a dialogue with them, and hopefully they want to, because that's how we're going to improve it across the board. Like, it's impossible for security to do it by themselves. So but it's also a super interesting area, so keep your eye on it, if you can. I realize like everybody's got a gazillion things, but like those basic things, those basic principles, if you can just, secure coding, all of that sort of stuff, the basic principles that have been around for a long time, if you can try and do them, you're a good, you're a long way ahead if you just do that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I want to appreciate your time as well. Like, this has been great catching up with you and kind of hearing your thoughts on security and how it kind of fits into this new technology landscape. For folks that aren't following Sarah on all different social media platforms, she's very similar to me. She has like Pokemon. She's collected like all the social media platforms.
Yeah.
One is you can find her on Blue Sky. So that's at Sarah Yo, SARAHYO.com. There'll be some links to some other ones down below. And first off, I want to say thank you, because
No,
again,
you're
it's always great talking to people that are in completely different disciplines than me, because you just think differently. So with that, do you have any parting words before we sign off?
I would say, like I said, please forgive us, security people, for probably not being very nice to you over the years, and please come talk to us and engage with us, because I think, like I said, we're trying to actually work with IT and not sit in a castle and wag our fingers.
Sure.
So come and help us, because at the end of the day, if security does affect everybody, if it doesn't work, everyone's having a bad day, so we kind of need to work together. So that's why I'm like, forgive us and come talk to us. We're your friends. You love security.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, we're all friends, right? Like, even if we hate
Yeah,
each other, we're still friends.
exactly.
So again, Sarah, I want to thank you so much for coming on,
No,
chatting
you're
with me.
welcome.
And the people that are listening live on this, thank you so much. And the people listening in the future, thank you as well. So my name is Isaac Levin. This has been Coffee and Open Source. And for my friend Sarah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.